Let's go.
You're listening to Europe's #1 pro wrestling podcast.
Set no substitutes.
Bringing you the best in pro wrestling interviews, news, and opinions with Mr. Stevie Knight.
Night time indeed with me, Mr. Stevie Knight. How are you? Of course, just replaying some of the recorded interviews that they did last year. This is one of my absolute favourites with one of my favourite wrestlers. I used to watch him growing up on World of Sport, and I also had the pleasure of wrestling him several times when I got involved with the business. Danny Boy Collins. As you listen to this, you will really understand the passion that it takes to get involved with the wrestling business. Tells some absolutely fantastic stories, some of the better ones involving his injuries that he's had during his career, and the fact that he had to still be carried to the car to make it to the venue to wrestle. Absolutely unbelievable. Also a story on there from a time in Japan where he was wrestling Dick Togo and got severely injured, being thousands of miles away from home, having nothing but a few painkillers, and 3 days sat in a hotel room in Tokyo until he could make it home, and being very, very lonely. He told me at the time, I remember saying he's not ashamed to say he was crying down the phone to his wife at the time. So a real professional. Anybody you speak to in the UK will know exactly who Danny Collins is. Has travelled all over the world. Very, very highly respected. So enjoy this one, recorded last year with the legendary, and I don't use that term very regularly because I think it's used too often, but this man certainly is a legend in British wrestling, and I know he doesn't like to be called that, but he is indeed a legend. So enjoy this with Danny Boy Collins. We start asking Danny how he got involved in the wrestling business.
By accident, I guess. I was taken along, like a lot of kids are, to a wrestling event by my parents and by a mad uncle I had. And the very first time I went to it was in Yate near Bristol, and I just fell in love with it. Absolutely fell in love with it. I knew that night that was what I wanted to do, and nothing was going to change my mind on that, you know. And from that moment, I was just driven, and as soon as I could, I joined an amateur wrestling club. It was about when I was 9. Broke my collarbone the first night. Didn't care less. Just got it repaired and went back as soon as I could. And I did that sort of 2 nights a week. And then when I was about 13, I started training for the pro ring 2 nights a week. So, even at that age, I was traveling 4 nights a week just to do the profession I wanted to do.
So you started this, and I know you posted a story recently about you start with the professional game. So you was going to school, and literally the day you finished school, you was off doing professional, wasn't you? Tell us that story.
Yeah, I because of the time of my birthday, I finished school when I was 15. And like I said earlier, I knew what I wanted to do, So I left school on the Friday and in my hometown in Bristol. Said goodbye to my parents on the Monday and left to move to Leeds. And that's where I stayed, for most of my life. I never went back. I just went back home to see my parents. But my life from then on was just totally changed. I was living my life on the road. God, it was hard. It was really, really hard. And I know old guys say that, and I can hear myself saying it. And I know I know I sound like an old bastard, but it really was hard, Steve. And you know it as well as I do. It was a real tough game to get into. This is no bullshit. You got your head kicked in every night. I got beat unrecognisable and left at shows, made to make my own way home. And some weeks I would spend my time in Brixton. I was still only 15 years old. 2 weeks in Brixton, 2 weeks in Leeds. Stayed in a cold, damp, grotty bedsit. Horrible place to be, especially in the 80s. Wasn't the greatest place. And it was really tough, and it was hard to stay focused some days. I think if I didn't have that real pure grit determination, it could have been quite easy for me to throw the towel in. And I guess in some ways that's what some of the older pros wanted, They wanted to see if you had what it took. And I just did what I did, patched myself up and got back there the next night and took it again.
Now, it was a real hard job to get into. I mean, I found it difficult to get into, and I'm a good 12 years, after you. Mm. How did you manage to get into the job? I'm assuming, did you start with Max Crabtree?
Yeah, I did. I started, I had my very first professional match in my hometown in Bristol. And like I said, I was 15 years old. I was terrified. There was 2,000 people in. It was my home crowd. and I had to perform. There was big expectations set on me, and I went in there and I did 6 rounds with a guy called Adrian Finch. Luckily, the crowd loved me, and it was sort of, from there on, really, my career just went on and on. And I was very fortunate, it was in the TV days then, and if you like, I was the youngster of the team. They were all old guys, been in the business a long, long time, and I was a little 16-year-old baby-faced boy. I'm not like that anymore, by the way, but in those days it was I had it made, really, and I just went from strength to strength.
You did. You started on World of Sport, and you was prominently featured on there a lot, wasn't you? You was very lucky to kind of get on there more or less straight away after you started. How long was it before you appeared on TV?
It wasn't
after you'd started in the job.
Yeah, it wasn't long at all, Steve. I think it was about 6 months. My first match was in Leeds Town Hall with Jimmy Breaks, and it was just surreal, because like we were talking about earlier, you really have to imagine this scenario. I was in school one moment, and then the next moment I was in this man's world, and it was men's men. And I had all this stuff going on, I had TV shows and interviews and radio interviews, and I was absolutely terrified, I just had no experience of this, and I really had to man up pretty quick. So yeah, that was the first match, about 6 months, I guess, after I'd been in the business.
And it's not just in the ring. I can probably relate to you a little bit here, because it's not just in the ring, is it? You're thrown into this land of men, aren't you? I remember being thrown into the back of the van with 4 guys, and the women come into it, don't they? And they want you to go out and pull these women, and I'd had no experience with women at all. I don't know about you at this stage, but it was frightening to me, absolutely frightening. It was like you'd been thrown into a completely different world.
Yeah, it literally was. You were just fed to the lions, weren't you? It was like I said, you really had to man up, and you had to man up quick. And you had to prove yourself, you had to prove that you could take what they were going to give you. And it was tough to do that. It was a real sort of lonesome period, if you like, because all the time you just felt isolated from the guys, You weren't allowed in the change rooms, you had to get changed in the hallway, and, there was this total alienation. And they would call it the 7-year apprenticeship, They would make you do that for 7 years, just to prove you really wanted to be in the business. And, it's just not like that anymore. Things have changed. But to be perfectly honest, Steve, I'm glad it was that way. It did make me man up. And I can remember guys like Finlay, after about 7 or 8 years, they really took me in and helped me. And they said, we had so much respect for you because we'd beat the living shit out of you every night, and you came back for more the next night. And he said, that's what it takes to make it in this business, And he said, you need never fear another man in your life. He said, you are more of a man than I ever thought you'd turn out to be. I'll never forget that.
Yeah. Do you think, because I had my fair share of beatings, you'll have had hundreds of beatings, and a lot of people I've spoken to have had a lot of beatings, and it's not just inside the ring, it's mental outside the ring, isn't it, as well, a lot of mental beatings. Do you think there's an element where you're being taught respect in the ring? Do you think also there's a part where it may go into bullying anywhere, Danny?
No, it's a fine line, isn't it? And I don't ever think I was bullied. I really don't think that. And if I'm really honest, Steve, I wouldn't have had it any other way. I think that did me the power of good. And it's even now I have my feet firmly planted on the ground. I never think I'm anything more than I am. I think I'm extremely lucky to have had the breaks I had. But having said that, I worked my ass off for them. I had to work for those breaks. But those guys taught you a lot of respect. And I've never ever lost that. I still respect those guys today. Murphy, Finlay, Marty Jones, all them old-timers, I still respect the hell out of them today. I've never ever lost that. And,
absolutely.
And I think that's a great thing to have. And it definitely keeps you humble,
Yeah. Now, speaking of breaks, that's the guy you really started with, isn't it, on TV? Talk about Jim Breaks. He's kind of a figure that has mesmerises a lot of people. How did he get on with Jim Breaks?
Jim is a legend, isn't he? Let's have it right. And it's amazing, really, because when people think of British wrestling, they think of all the giants in the business, Big Daddy, Giant Haystacks. But if you actually look back, most of the top names and the top guys in the business around that time were middleweights, or light heavyweights. Jimmy Breaks, Mick McManus, those sort of guys. Les Kellett, Jackie Pallo, all those guys. They were all middleweights, welterweights. And Jimmy, for me, was just fantastic. What he did, his timing was great, real professional, and he had the crowd eating out of his hand, And wrestling with Jimmy it was easy for me and it was hard for me, in two ways. It was hard because, again, Jimmy could be a tough opponent. He was a great amateur and he really knew his stuff in the ring. But it was also easy for me because you've got the guy that everybody loves to hate, Jimmy Brake's a bad guy, and the jumping up and down thing, and you've also got me as a 15, 16-year-old, babyface looking, clean-shaven guy. It was dead easy for me, really, to get the fans on my side. I really didn't have to do anything. I literally just had to leave that to Jimmy. He was a fantastic pro, and he did what he did.
Yeah, you was the last guy. A lot of the guys I used to speak to when I started, like with Marty and Drew, used to say to me, you was the last guy that Max really pushed on the TV before the TV went off. Why do you think that was?
I think Max was a very clever man, and I would never say anything against Max. I've never had a wrong word to say about him. I liked the bloke, and not purely because he gave me a push on TV, purely because when people talk about promoters, for me there are promoters and there are people who run shows. And the name itself, promoter, gives you the clue. What he's actually doing is taking somebody who was really unknown, just a schoolboy in Bristol, totally unknown to anybody, and doing exactly what it says on the tin, promoting him, And that's exactly what Max did. Max was a promoter, and he would take anybody and make them a household name overnight. He knew exactly how to do it, and you've seen so many examples coming through Dale Martins, of good promotion, good promoting. And Max is a prime example of that. He absolutely knew his stuff and probably still does today, He knew how to make something of somebody.
You were a frequent tag partner of Big Daddy back in the day. What did you think to being the guy that did all the work in the ring for Daddy to come in and take the glory?
I didn't really care too much, Steve, to be honest with you. It was a good variation for me, and it was, it was a good way for me to get my name across in those days. Pretty much anybody who was Daddy's tag partner had a good, decent following, and was well known. It also meant I got to work with most of the top guys, the likes of Giant Haystacks and Finlay and stuff were in the tags regularly. So yeah, I quite enjoyed it, to be honest with you. It was always a packed house, and the places like the Royal Albert Hall in London. Sell out crowds, going into the ring in front of 6,000-7,000 people as Daddy's tag partner then. Yeah, great buzz for a young school kid.
Fantastic time to have got started in the job.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're being in the ring, obviously, like you say, with the Finleys, Roccos, and all these kind of people. Who was your favourite guy to get in the ring with? Let's not pinpoint one. Who was some of your favourite guys to get in the ring with at that point? Obviously, Finleys and Roccos are names that people live on. Who were some of the names that maybe people have forgotten about now?
Oh, God, I enjoyed most of the guys then because all those guys in their heyday, could wrestle. They'd all been taught properly. If I was going to pick some specifics, there were some great guys like Mal Sanders, Steve Gray. Steve was always great for doing wrestling matches with. Like you mentioned, Finlay, Skull Murphy. Loved working with Owen Hart. Owen Hart was an absolute legend for me and one of the biggest losses in the business. Absolutely love that guy. I could talk to you all night about favourite opponents. God, I've just had so many, Steve. It would just be an endless list, to be honest with you. All the guys back in their day then would talk properly, like I said. They knew the business inside out. They could do 6 rounds with a chair and get a match out of them,
Yeah. Do you think at any point the world of sport there was, and I'm not going to disagree with you at all, there was some, like everybody you just named, fantastic talent. If you look back on some of it, it wasn't all roses, was it? There was some rose-tinted things. There was not everybody on there was brilliant, was there?
Well, it's like anything you get in life. You always get your bill fillers, don't you? You get your top of the bills, you get your follow-up matches, and you always get a bottom of the bill, if you like. You always get that through any sport and any business, but there's always been middle-of-the-road workers and what I would call low-quality workers, just budget workers. And it's funny, isn't it, because some people can be in this business 1 year and be fantastic. Some people can be in it 30 years and be absolute shit.
Yes, very true.
That is absolutely true, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
I've worked with guys that have only been in the business a year and they're absolute dream, they know the business.